Welcome to class, everybody. How we all doing today? Doing all right? Yeah, not having the video panel sucks, right? It doesn't show up there either. How do I do this? I guess I would probably have to restart the program. It's not worth doing at this point. Um, okay. So I feel like we just saw each other less than 24 hours ago. Probably because we did. How have the last 24 hours been going? Anything exciting happen? Ellie was telling me a story. She got a shot. That's exciting. Anybody else get the shots in the last 24 hours? um, I'll see how the chat's doing. How's everything going, chat? How's everything going, chat? Gabrielle in the chat. I don't see Brendan. Maybe Brendan will show up. Still got a few minutes. Adam's great. Getting my shot tomorrow. Good. Very exciting. Pretty good. Okay. Yeah. Look at you guys. You guys are very upbeat folks, even this early in the morning. I love it. So this is a special class. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but sometimes there's sort of like some clicks with a class. I feel like this is one of those classes. And of course, it makes my job a lot more interesting. So, all right. Well, I'm glad to hear you guys are doing well. And we were just talking about how this is a bit of a marathon week for me, at least, and for some of you. Having the Monday schedule on a Wednesday. Wednesday is usually sort of a break day for me. And so then this week it's been like boom, boom, boom. I taught Tuesday, Wednesday, now Thursday. So I imagine there's probably something similar for a lot of you guys. So hopefully you still have some energy. You still feel excited. The beautiful days outside are very energizing. You guys feel excited about the beautiful days these days? It makes it hard to be inside a classroom. But I feel like getting up early in the morning, it's kind of cool outside. The flowers are nice. The sun is rising. It's really it makes you feel good about being alive. So hopefully you guys are able to enjoy those things too. On that note, maybe I'll remind you of something that's not so exciting is maybe you guys are excited. I don't know. We have an exam next week. Here's the review sheet. Or no, that's the wrong one. Ooh, it's tiny. Midterm 2 review sheet. Why is it so small? So again, I gave this to you, I think just a couple days ago. You probably haven't had time to really look through it. But I just want to remind you that this is looming in the future, and it is time to start thinking about it maybe this weekend. So if you haven't started looking at it, don't worry or anything, but we've got one more class before the exam. I think I've told you this before. I teach another section of this course that only meets once a week. So I'm going to hold a review session mostly for them because they won't have another chance to review for the exam. That'll be tomorrow. So if you guys want to come, you're welcome to come. It'll be 2 o'clock tomorrow in the Zoom room. So I'll send you an email. I think last time nobody from this section came just because you guys have Monday to kind of fill in that space too. So anyways, but I'll still send the invitation to you in case anybody wants to come. Any questions so far? Has anybody started studying and they want to go over anything?
Short essays.
You say short essay, Romar?
Yeah, just short essays.
Yes, there are. So if you look here, there's quotation, explanation, short essays. It'll be just like the last one. So I know last time you had a lot of questions like, what is the exam really going to be? You should have a sense now of what it'll be like. So it'll be the same number of questions. What was it last time? Was it 10? I think it was 10. 10 quotation explanations and then 2 short essays. I'll give you 3 and you choose 2. So it'll be the same program, same ideas, same number of questions, same everything.
You don't do like multiple choice and stuff?
I don't do multiple choice and stuff. Yeah, I feel like one reason for that is it's to say it's too easy is not the point, but what does multiple choice often test is it kind of tests like, can you memorize stuff, right? And under normal times, I'll give you a physical piece of paper. There'll be multiple choice. There'll be fill in the blank. But I don't do it this time just because if it's open book and open note, multiple choice is just like, hey, can you look through your notes and find what I'm asking you to find? You know what I mean? It becomes a less interesting exercise. So I try to keep it a bit more open and a bit more analytical. The quotation explanations are almost like they're not multiple choice, but they are testing like, can you find the quote? You know what I mean? But then I also ask you to analyze it a little bit. So there's a little bit of that memorization aspect to it. Oh, Romar got kicked out as I was answering his question. There's a little bit of that memorization aspect to it, but not completely. Romar, it looks like you got kicked off out of the room. So anyways, but to answer your question, yeah, it'll be the same as last time: quotation explanations and the short essays.
Yeah.
And that being said, if anybody wants to talk about like study habits, if you feel like last time you didn't know what to do and you were totally lost when you're taking the exam, send me an email. Come to office hours. I could talk today. I could talk tomorrow. I could talk Monday next week. And I think I talked about this last time, but it's more useful information now. The big difference between kind of that curve at the upper end of the spectrum and the lower end of the spectrum is the students on the upper end of the spectrum knew what to do with their notes, right? Downloaded the slides is step number one. Again, I make the slides, so of course I have them, but download the slides. If you don't have the slides, you are losing out on a very easy resource to find all the things that I'm asking you to find. And if you don't know how to kind of manipulate these or to search through them, copy and paste them all into a Word document. If you don't know how to do that, I can show you how to do that. So as you're preparing for the exam, really focus on getting your notes ready. It's something I kind of assumed everybody knew how to do, but I'm realizing not everybody does. So if you're confused about kind of how to prepare for the exam, talk to me. I want to help you. I want to give you the tools that I know at least some of the students have to just make things more fair, more even. Okay, so yeah, good question, Romar. So what is on the exam? Other questions about exams or anything? Specific terms you want to go over? Okay. So keep this in mind. That's the main thing. I just want to remind you, exam is on the way. Okay, so this is what we did yesterday. We don't have to do a big review. A lot of the time we do kind of a bigger review because we have several days in between, but this time it feels a little like it's just unnecessary because we just did this yesterday, right? So what did we talk about yesterday? We talked about teachers. We said how these adepts, they're called siddhas, right? The adepts, the sort of special meditator, often monks, but not necessarily monks. They try to gain these attainments, right? Which I gave you the Sanskrit word for it. You don't have to know the Sanskrit word for it. It's called siddhi, but you don't have to know it. In order to gain these attainments, we need a teacher. We need someone to show us how, right? If we're doing magic, maybe we don't need a teacher. It's always good to have a teacher, but you're sort of doing the Harry Potter thing. You're reading the spell from the book, or you memorize the spell, and it's the spell that does the work. Here, you really want to develop some sort of, here's a word from Foucault. Do you guys know who Foucault is? You probably don't know Foucault. I'll type his name in the chat. He's a good name to know. Foucault. He was a French philosopher who died in the late 80s or maybe early 90s, but a very sharp thinker. People like him. People refer to him a lot. He has this term, a technology of the self, which is maybe not exactly what he meant, but I think it's applicable here, right? So we're trying to sort of develop a technology of the self, become a stronger, better, more capable person. And that is sort of the goal here. But the question is, how do you do that? And the answer is you get a teacher. At least that's what this particular tradition says, this tantric Buddhist tradition in particular. And also we'll see in Zen Buddhism, teachers are really important. So that's one reason we're spending so much time on this, is we'll actually see it again when we're reading the Zen book. So we talked yesterday about your teachers and mentors and influencers. We don't have to answer this again, but I just want to remind you that is what we discussed. And the reason we discussed it is just to remember that we have these teachers in our lives, right? Other people help make us who we are. We often think it's our family. That was something I thought about, from our class and from the other section I taught, is a lot of people wanted to talk about their family. Our family really does make us who we are. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's an American thing. I'm not sure. I don't know why this is, but there's a really strong emphasis like, yes, your family, they're the ones who make you who you are. But I want to remind you too, it's not just your family, right? It's also, some of you talked about it, your friends, right? Your friends can be, here it is, a spiritual friend, right? Your friends can have an influence on you. Your teachers, your mentors, your coaches, all these other figures who play a part in your life. I loved listening to your stories. There's some really nice stories yesterday about maybe seemingly small things, but to me they felt pretty big, right? Especially because I am a teacher. I'm always thinking about, how can I do my job well? Hearing these stories about the English teacher or the basketball coach or whatever who really made an impression on you, again, it warms my heart, right? It makes me think like, oh yeah, there is like something kind of behind this whole enterprise of teaching. So I want you guys to remember that too, right? We have these teachers, mentors, influencers in our lives. And also, as you guys become, mature adults who are capable, outstanding members of society, you will also become teachers and mentors and influencers for, potentially your family, but even beyond that too, right? For all the different people you interact with. And so we kind of left with this question is, okay, these spiritual friends, these teachers, they're important. How do you find them? How do you examine them? That was one kind of interesting detail, right? Is to think, all right, it's important to get a good one, right? If this relationship is so intimate and so close and so impactful, you need to find a good teacher, a good spiritual friend. It's a little bit creepy to make the comparison, but it's a little bit like finding a partner, right? Finding someone that you are going to become intimate with. And this is a very intimate relationship, obviously in a different way. But at the same time, there is a similar degree of intensity. At least that's what's being promised, particularly in this tradition. And so once you examine this potential teacher and determine that they're a good one, then we finished, or we cut off yesterday with the question of kind of how to follow a teacher, right? What are the techniques? And maybe remember, these are some weird stories, right? They're really intense, and you don't have to agree with them, right? I hope you already know that about my class. I'm not here to like give you the truth that you then, receive, right? You don't have to always agree with me, and I don't always have to agree with the readings I assign, right? Sometimes you see this on Twitter where it says like retweet does not equal endorsement, right? Just because I assign something does not mean I'm endorsing it, right? I'm offering it to you to think about it. That's really the key here. And so I want you to think about this, right? What is being promoted here? Why is it being promoted in this way? What might be valuable about these techniques that are being promoted? I would argue there is a value, and so that I encourage you to be open to it. But then what is potentially dangerous about these techniques? And I would argue, yes, there are many dangers too. So these are all things that we can continue to think about today. And then emulation. Do you guys know this word? Emulate? Emulate. It's sort of like imitate. What's the difference between emulate and imitate? It's very close, actually. So yeah, imitate is the first synonym. Match or surpass a person or achievement, typically by imitation, right? So this is basically saying the same thing as imitate. My understanding is there's an expectation that it's sort of for somebody who is greater than you, right? You can imitate someone who's your equal or even lower than you, right? You can imitate what your little cousin is doing or whatever. And it's, not a wrong way of using that word. Emulate almost always has this implication of somebody who's better than you, right? So they're better than you and you want to kind of raise up to them. And so of course that's what is being promoted here, right? Is to find someone who's better than you, find someone who can teach you, and then rise up to their level. So again, that's the spiritual path that is being promoted here. And it's also very different from, for example, the Eightfold Path, the middle way. Remember all that sort of stuff? That was the path to enlightenment that we saw before. Remember that? This is a very different path to enlightenment. And they don't have to be in contradiction with each other. I don't think they are necessarily, but it's a very different sort of teaching. And again, this is being promoted as a path to enlightenment. This is how you achieve enlightenment, is by means of this teacher. So these are all kind of some things we covered yesterday. We didn't quite get into those details yet, but this is, again, kind of what we'll finish up this discussion today. It actually works pretty well that these classes are back to back. Any questions so far about things we covered yesterday or what we're going to do today? Doing all right? Okay, so just very quickly, this is a slide from yesterday. I kind of squished some things together, I think, or maybe this is just straight from yesterday, but Pacha Rinpoche, when he was talking about examining a teacher, what is the one single most important thing? Is they should be compassionate, right? The technical term is bodhicitta, and we also talked about this yesterday, how teaching is a very interpersonal exercise. And if somebody is kind of selfish and overly concerned with their own situation and not so concerned with the situation of their students, they probably won't be able to rise to the occasion of teaching, right? And we went over some examples of bad teachers. I think we talked about the frog. Did we talk about the millstone? I don't think we talked about that one. You guys want to talk about that one? Let's talk about it. Just, to get a sense of what these criticisms are. Do you know what a millstone is? This is something I also realize, is we are not farmers. And so these metaphors are being used kind of for an agricultural society where basically everybody knows what a millstone is, but you guys might not know what a millstone is. Do you know what a millstone is? What is a mill? What is the point of a mill? So here's a millstone. What do these do? Anybody? Chat? Millstone? I mean, this is not, farming class, so we don't have to spend too much time on it. But this is good things to know, right? Because we actually benefit from mills of some kind. Might not be stone ground grains that we are eating, but we need these things, right? What do? They're an important step. Don't they what? They grind up grains and stuff. Exactly. Yeah. So each two circular stones used for grinding grain. And I'm not an expert of this, so don't, I can't answer all of your millstone questions, but let's just look at grain for a second. Can you eat this like straight up? Can you eat these grains? Maybe some of them, but most of them, the answer is no. They got to be processed first, right? Maybe I'm overstating that. Some of them you can eat straight up, but in order to make flour, let's just put it that way, in order to make flour, and why do you need flour? What does flour go into? Can you make bread without flour? No, you cannot, right? So in order to make bread, in order to make noodles, you guys like noodles? I like noodles. Noodles are actually very easy to make. This is something I learned from hanging out with Tibetan people. You just mix flour and water and you get noodles. So to make flour, you need to grind the grain, right? See, look how pulverized this all is. And in Tibet, I don't think we've talked, have we talked about, maybe we did talk about this actually. The grain that is often used is called tsampa, and it's this roasted barley flour. So this is the unroasted barley, and then, the unground barley, and then this gets put into a millstone and turned into this, tsampa. And then you can eat a ball of it, or you could put it into a soup, or you could do all sorts of stuff with it. So coming back to this, a millstone made of wood, all of the millstones we saw are made out of stone. In fact, it is called a millstone, right? So what is wrong with a millstone made of wood? This is a lot of work to get to this metaphor, but maybe it's worth it. We're learning about things, right? We're learning about food and stuff. So what's wrong with a millstone made of wood? Just use your imagination. What would happen if you tried to grind grain between two slabs of wood? It wouldn't work. It wouldn't grind the grain. The whole point of a millstone is to grind the grain, right? To produce flour. If you used a millstone made of wood, it would not serve its purpose. It wouldn't do it, right? And so if we come back to this metaphor here, what kind of teachers are like a millstone made out of wood? They're the ones, let's see, they have no trace of qualities arising from study, reflection, meditation. They defend their caste like Brahmins, right? So they're the ones who, again, kind of wear the scholarly outfit. They're like, yeah, look at me, I'm a professor. Yeah, everybody needs to respect me. They can kind of enjoy the social status of being a teacher, that sort of thing. But when it comes to actually teaching someone, they have no knowledge, right? Just like a millstone made out of wood cannot transform grain into flour, this sort of teacher cannot transform an uneducated student into an educated student. They just don't have the capacity. Have you ever met a teacher like this before? I hope not, right? Because most of your teachers are like certified by the government or, by Manhattan College or whatever, and they have degrees and that sort of stuff. So hopefully this sort of teacher is rare, but you could imagine a time before there were PhDs or anything like that. It's a little less regulated, right? The standards were a little lower or a little harder to enforce, and there were probably a lot of charlatans. You know what a charlatan is? Okay, Connor knows what millstones do. Good. Charlatan. So charlatan is just kind of like a faker, right? It's somebody who pretends to be something that they're not. And we get into imposter syndrome. Have you guys heard of imposter syndrome before? So some people think they are charlatans, but I'd say for the most part, actually, we are highly qualified, highly educated people. And it's more this idea of the millstone made of wood kind of teacher is a problem more of the past. So anyways, maybe that was too much time on a very minor point, but hopefully we learned what a millstone is. Questions about these teachers to be avoided? Okay, so I think the takeaway is some teachers are to be avoided, right? That not everybody's a good teacher, and that's okay, right? But it's important to recognize that not everybody's a good teacher. This is where we stopped last time, and so let's pick up here. I was telling the story of Tilopa and his student Naropa. I realized I kind of rearranged the slide. I think last time it was a little more confusing about who is who and what's their relationship. So again, Tilopa, he's this guy here. He was eating fish out of a bucket, kind of near the wharf or whatever, just like on the dock somewhere. And just to be clear, this is a weird thing to do. People, even in ancient India, I think any time, to be sitting around and eating live fish out of a bucket is a weird thing to do, right? Nobody would think that that is appropriate behavior, at least not in any society that I've ever encountered. So he is a weird, low caste beggar, but he's also an adept, right? And so it goes to show that these qualities are beyond beyond the initial perception, beyond the initial appearances. Somebody who looks like a beggar could have very deep, profound knowledge. And in fact, this is sort of a common trope throughout Buddhism, particularly in East Asia. There's a mountain called Utaishan in China, which is the center for the Bodhisattva of wisdom. And it's very common to have stories of like weird old men just showing up out of nowhere and asking weird questions. And then it turns out it's like, oh, that was Manjushri. That was the Bodhisattva of wisdom, or sometimes Avalokiteshvara. And so there's a common trope in Buddhism where things are not as they appear. We've talked about this before, right? Things appear to be permanent, but frankly, they are not permanent, right? That's a big one. And this is something I think relevant for our society, right? People might appear to be high class or appear to be low class. Again, I'm not necessarily going out telling you to go out and hug the next beggar you see, but there are a lot of beggars in New York. They have sort of a weird stigma around them. Like people like, whoa, I'm gonna get out of this train car and go to the next train car. Have you ever seen this before, right? Of course, yeah. And so what this is doing is asking you to sort of see through these appearances, right? And in fact, There's a name for this process. It's called pure perception. And this shouldn't come as a surprise. With a lot of Buddhist techniques, there's this emphasis on how you perceive reality, right? Remember, we talked about deconstructing things and reconstructing things. So this is part of a theme we've seen before, but now it's being applied to teachers, right? Seeing a teacher, seeing the value in a teacher, even when they don't initially present it. Sometimes there are depths to a teacher that they don't initially show. And so Naropa, he's this high caste Indian scholar. He encounters this low caste beggar, and he's like, you know what? This guy might have some things to teach me, right? He heard of him before, and so he gives him a chance. And really, this story is all about developing this pure perception. There's some quotes here that I just picked out. Let's see. You know that I like the quotes, but yeah, on 146, there's a good paragraph. It kind of goes through the story of Tilopa, and the upshot, the end of the paragraph, it said, "It is therefore important not to take any of your teacher's actions in the wrong way. Train yourself to have only pure perception." Right? So Tilopa is eating these raw fish, and everybody who sees that would think that's a really weird thing to do. But it's saying in reality, he's like sending them off to a pure Buddha field, right? You can read the paragraph, it's on 146. And there's more after that too. On 151, let's see what's happening in the scene here. Buddha in person. Yeah, this is more kind of a theoretical part, but it's also saying you need to examine your teacher. And once you decide that this is a real qualified teacher, then you need to develop this pure perception. And again, use your critical analysis here. But it says if if they're lacking some qualities, don't follow them. But from the moment you start to follow a teacher, learn to have faith in him and see him with pure perception, thinking only of his virtues and seeing whatever he does as positive. Looking for flaws in him will only bring you inconceivable ills, right? And the rest of this story is basically about that process, right? I think we ran out of time just as I was telling you some of the more gruesome details, but Tilopa basically encourages his disciple to jump off the roof of a building, which seems like a pretty weird thing to do, and yet he does it anyway. But then he heals him and brings him back. He tortures him. He shoves these horrible like wooden spikes under his nails and leaves him there with really horrible pain. There's more. Actually, the most famous moment is on 159. He smacks him in the head with a sandal and knocks him out. Let's see, I'll just read this to you. So on 159, with his right hand, he took off his sandal and he hit his disciple on the forehead with it. Naropa lost consciousness. When he came to, all the qualities of his teacher's wisdom mind had arisen within him. Teacher and disciple had become one in realization. So it's taking these really, again, brutal, violent acts of the teacher and asking the student to reinterpret them as a teaching, right? As a moment from which the student can grow. So this is pure perception. Hopefully these are enough examples to get a sense of what pure perception is about. And maybe, why don't we take a few minutes? We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but since I want you to know this concept, let's talk about it. Another way to think about it is, if your teacher appears angry, conclude that he has seen a fault in you, ripe for correction with his rebukes, right? Again, this is just setting you up for a pretty nasty relationship with a teacher, right? Anything the teacher does, anytime the teacher gets angry, anytime they show any sort of sternness, then it is probably my fault, right? I probably did something wrong. You could imagine how this kind of sets the scene for an abusive relationship, right? So I hope this isn't too triggering for anybody to even think about these sorts of things. So what are some potential problems with pure perception? Maybe this is really obvious, but let's put it into words. But I want you to think, are there benefits? Right? What might be a benefit from developing this pure perception? What sort of relationship would this work for? Right? How in an ideal situation, how could this work well? So these are my two questions for you. I mean, the first one is basically, what is pure perception? And there's not like one page I can point you to where you get the full answer. I've pointed you to a few pages. 146, maybe I'll throw these in the chat. You guys can take notes if you want to return to these. 146, 151, the whole Talopa Naropa story. So that's in the 150s. And then this one's from 148. So this whole sort of 10-page range is all about developing this capacity, what they're calling pure perception. So now I want you to discuss, what is pure perception? What are some problems with it? What are some potential benefits from it? Or what maybe I can phrase that a little better. Under what circumstances would this really work, right? Can you imagine a situation where this could work? Maybe that's a better way of putting it. So let's discuss this for a little while. Again, I just want you to understand this concept, and then we can come back to the big group. Any questions before we discuss? How are your conversations? What do we think of pure perception? It's a little weird, right? What do you guys think? What did we talk? Anybody in the chat have good conversations? How were the conversations? What's the general consensus on pure perception? Do we want to give it a thumbs up or thumbs down? How do I make emojis? Do we want a thumbs up?
Thumbs down, but
Thumbs down.
you can kind of like see some of the positive benefits.
But
it's negative, but there's parts of pure perception that if you pull out, you can still help in your life.
okay. Well, let's start with the thumbs down. Why are we thumbs down on pure perception? I'm not surprised by this, right? One reason I'm being so gentle in my presentation is I want to, kind of like what John was saying, I want to give you a little window into what value might be here, but I think first we need to sort of call a spade, as they say, right? Like there are major problems with this approach to Buddhism, and there are major problems with Buddhism today because of this approach. So allow me to just say that first very clearly. What are the problems? What are the problems with pure perception? Problems? It sounds like brainwashing. Okay, interesting. How is it like brainwashing? Yeah, it is asking for full devotion to someone. Yeah. Do we like to give our full devotion to people unconditionally? Generally not, right? We're taught to be kind of skeptical of absolute power, aren't we? What is that saying about absolute power? You guys know the saying about absolute power? What happens with absolute power? It corrupts, absolutely, right? I don't know the source of that saying, but I think there's some truth to it, right? If I were Tilopa, for example, and I had a student doing whatever I told them to do, if I had any ounce of sadism, right, any ounce of malice inside of me, that could come out in very negative ways, right? Even if I'm generally a good person. The minute somebody is fully devoted to me, it opens up many doors for problems, right? For major problems. Okay, good. Now, maybe we can ask, why is this being promoted? Why would a teacher want this pure perception? If we approach it purely from the stance of education, so let's say I want to teach you guys all to be enlightened. Why would we potentially need something like this? What is the point? Because again, this isn't just like chemistry class or something. Maybe I'll hit the light so you can see it better. This isn't like chemistry class or something, right? This is Buddhism. This is enlightenment. This is the big question of life, right? Why does enlightenment, again, according to this, why does it require this kind of devotion to the teacher? Can we make sense of that? Maybe I can answer that for you if that's too hard. So imagine this, right? Why do we suffer in Buddhism? Is there some like outside devil who's making us suffer? Kinda. There's Mara, right? Mara's there. And in fact, Mara shows up in one of these slides, I think. Is this one? Yeah. We will not fall under the power of Mara. What does it mean to fall under the power of Mara? This is more, we can interpret this as a metaphor. What causes us to suffer? This is reaching back to the beginning of class, but do you remember? Four Noble Truths, all that sort of stuff. Why do we suffer? Craving. Very good. Yeah. So these negative emotions, our minds are dominated by these habits, right? That we're kind of stuck in. And I think there is some truth to that. You don't have to be Buddhist. You don't have to buy into this. But again, put your imagination hat on. Imagine that the source of all of our problems have to do with our habits, the way we think, the way we act, the mistakes we make, right? And then we meet someone who is perfect. And again, imagination. I think we're all generally under the assumption that no one is perfect, right? And that absolute power corrupts absolutely. But let's just imagine we meet someone who is perfect and knows not only how their own mind works, but also knows how our mind works, and can then intervene in our minds. And there are negative terms for this, like gaslighting and brainwashing and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it can be very negative, absolutely. But imagine doing it in a positive way. Imagine, right? Maybe you've never imagined this before, but imagine if somebody knew how to be perfect and knew what you needed in order to be perfect. Wouldn't that be the perfect teacher? And even if they did really weird stuff, yelled and screamed, maybe even they got violent, right? Or did something horrible. But if you needed them in order to change your habits, in order to change your mind, this would be a very powerful technique, right? To wake you up, to snap you out of those habits, right? To push you in just the right way so that you can then see your own mind, see your own nature, see reality the way it is supposed to be. That's how this is designed, right? That's the ideal situation, is if you have a perfect teacher. And again, this is key. You have to have a perfect teacher for this to work. And then you treat them like a perfect teacher. Everything they do will be a teaching, even if not everybody else can see it, right? And in fact, the goal here is to develop a perception of the world and of people where you can learn about it, right? Where you are constantly the student and you can learn the most you possibly can from your teacher. Okay, so that's the ideal scenario. Now, let's come back to reality, where teachers are not perfect. Teachers are regular old people like me, for example. Let's imagine you start treating me like I'm a Buddha, right? Like I am perfect, even though I'm not. Everything I do could all of a sudden become a lesson, right? Now, there will have to be a certain amount of trust. You'll have to trust that I will not do bad things, right? That I will be kind to you. And again, that comes back to this initial point we made. This compassion is really key, right? If this isn't there, this relationship breaks down. It turns into a relationship of abuse, right? And so what this is asking for is trust in many ways. And again, trust is hard to give. We live in a society where trust is often, frankly, broken or disrespected. It's hard to trust in this society, trust anyone, frankly. Any institution, right? There are institutions designed to prey upon us. You ever think about this? It doesn't have to be this way, right? Now I'm starting to rant a little bit, but it doesn't have to be this way. But we happen to be in a society where we are taught not to trust, right? We are taught not to trust because if you trust too much, you will get burned. And unfortunately, that's kind of a fact, right? And I just speaking from my own experience, right? This has been my life, right? Is often getting burned from trusting too much. So in any case, you should not use your trust lightly. This is my advice to you. Be careful with your trust. But when you find someone who is trustworthy, the rare person who is trustworthy, do not be stingy with your trust, right? Because a lot can be gained from that trust too. And I think that is what this lesson, that is the lesson that we can sort of pull from this. So are there any benefits to developing pure perception? I'm going to argue that yes, there are, right? And again, you don't have to agree with me, or you don't have to even necessarily see them initially, but that is the argument I'm going to try to make today. That being said, that doesn't negate all of this other stuff. There are many problems with these relationships. And again, Buddhism is not immune to the abuses, for example, of the Catholic Church, right? You guys familiar with those? I hope you are, because again, we're in a Catholic school. Many stories of abuse, so many horrible stories of abuse. And it's from this kind of thing, right? People treat priests like they're perfect and they get burned because of that. This has been a scourge in Catholic communities. It has rotted them, right? So many Catholics have turned away from the church because of this, right? Because of this breach of trust. Maybe, I mean, if you don't know what I'm talking about, we can talk after class. I'm too bashful to even say it. But those sorts of things, these kinds of abuses, happen in Buddhism too. They do. Frankly, anytime you get a bunch of men and tell them to wear weird robes and shave their heads and just hang out together, you will get this kind of abuse. It will happen. And it does happen in all Buddhist communities too. So I in a way, I'm warning you, the Buddhists are not free from these abuses. That being said, with all this in mind, right, all these abuses, all this horror, and frankly, I'm bringing up horror right now, all this in mind, there is something to be gained from trust too. I encourage you to be brave and to trust, but just to be careful with that trust. So what can be gained? There's another story, the story of Milarepa. I know I've given you many names and many stories, and maybe it's a little overwhelming, but I think because we're doing it over 2 days, it should be a little easier. And in fact, Marpa is Milarepa's teacher. And who is Marpa? His teacher was Naropa, right? So it's actually a lineage of these 4 figures. And it's very important in Buddhism to think about these lineages. This is often how history is told. When I tell Tibetan people that I study Buddhism, they often ask me, who's your teacher? Because that tells you a whole world about what kind of person I am, right? And maybe you can see why, right? The teacher is everything. You are your teacher. Everything you know reflects on your teacher, right? It's a very conservative tradition in a lot of ways. So there's a sense that there's this precious knowledge that is passed down from generation to generation. That's not how I teach my class, as you can probably already tell, right? I'm not here to pour my wisdom into your empty cups, right? Something Brielle was talking about is how this feels very unidirectional, right? It's going just from the teacher who's very up high down to the student who's very down low. That is not how we run this class, right? I learn a lot from you guys. I learn a lot from teaching, but also from speaking with you, from listening to you. When we have the breakout rooms, right? That's the whole point, is to give you guys the microphone. I'm begging you to take the microphone, in fact, right? Because that is how real learning works, right? It's not to always top down. And we're going to continue with this on Monday, actually. That will be kind of the final cap on this conversation about hierarchy and so forth. We have 20 minutes. That's pretty good amount of time. Maybe there is time to watch a little video clip. This is another story about wizards. Maybe you thought we were done with wizards, but no, we're not done with wizards. But this is it's a story of a sinner becoming a saint. He was a murderous wizard, this guy Milarepa. He was a murderous wizard who became an enlightened Buddha in a single lifetime, right? So this is a very famous story in Tibet. It's a very celebrated story in Tibet, and it's kind of the culmination of all these other stories that we were listening to. Because like I said, Silopa to Naropa to Marpa to Milarepa. We're going from India, from East India, all the way to the mountains of Tibet. Geographically very different, culturally very different, and it's kind of the story of how Buddhism came to Tibet. So I told you that this reading for today is Tibetan, right? It's designed for a Tibetan audience. So this is, again, kind of the climax of this long line of stories, is how did Buddhism come to Tibet? So let's watch a little bit of it. So let me look at the timestamps that I gave for myself, 54 and then 111. So this is a cool movie. It's probably the best produced movie Tibetan movie that I've ever seen, which is why I'm sharing it with you. Maybe I'll pause in case there are copyright flags and set this stuff up. So yeah, this is one little piece of the life of Milarepa, but I think it helps us get a little background on who the student is, right? Before we learned about Naropa, we didn't really know who he was. We didn't really know who Talopa was, but here there's a depth to the character that he has a story, right? He has a father, he has a mother, he has an uncle who has caused problems for him. He has a past, he has sins that he has committed. He's murdered people, right? We can maybe understand why, sort of like Nong Nok, right? We can understand why she murdered people. We can understand why he murdered people, but he murdered people nonetheless, right? And so let's not confuse that. What is the critique here that the monk offered him, right? He was running away from his enemies. What did the monk say about his enemies? Did you catch that part? It was a little poetic. The monk said, your enemies are in your mind, right? What did that mean? Did he mean that, no, those enemies don't actually exist? Not exactly, right? So what did he mean when he said those enemies are in your mind? Maybe I can make this a little more general. There's a critique of magic here, right? I asked you guys to write papers about magic, and some of you also critiqued magic, saying it's irrational, it doesn't really make sense, it doesn't really work, something like that. That's fine. You're probably right. Here, that is not the critique of magic. And yet, this is a critique of magic, right? What is the critique of magic here? In the story that we just watched. I only gave you a little taste of it, but I think it was enough.
Is it like that we create our own enemies?
How do we create our own enemies, John?
In our mind, we automatically start grouping people in our minds from like friends, family, people that we can trust. So anyone else is just considered an enemy.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. And, this might feel like victim blaming because in many ways Milarepa was a victim. But how did Milarepa make enemies? Well, he made them by killing his cousins. Why did he kill his cousins? Is because he was seeking revenge. Why was he seeking revenge? Is because he was wronged. Why was he wronged? Well, we don't know. Maybe it goes sort of an eye for an eye kind of thing way back. Have you guys ever heard of family feuds? This is actually very common, let's just say, in the old world in traditional society. I kill somebody's brother, they kill me. My brother kills them. Then that brother kills another one of my brothers, right? And it just sort of goes back and forth, people doing wrongs to each other. So I think John is right. We do make our enemies. We make them through our actions. We also make them through these categories we create in our minds. We create those categories based on what is done to us, and the cycle continues, right? Maybe remember the term samsara, cyclic existence, right? This is one of the cycles of violence. They're very common. And we see this here. We only have 5 minutes left, so maybe we can just finish this story of Milarepa, and then we'll call it a day. So, actually, no, before we move on, any other thoughts on this? What is the critique of magic here? I don't think we've quite finished this thought yet. It's not that it doesn't work, because clearly it does work. Let's just imagine that it does work in this world, and yet there's still a critique of it. What's the critique? Why did the monk say, cease negative actions, cultivate positive actions, learn to, it's really more like purify your mind. They use control because that's a more common way of saying it in English, but I like the word purify a little bit better. Why does the monk say that? Yeah. He was committing murders with magic, right? The critique is not that it doesn't work. The critique that it is that it's immoral, right? It is a moral critique. It's an ethical critique. It's just like any other tool, right? Many of you wrote in your papers is that it is not a useful tool, but that is not the point here. It's that we should not use these tools to perform acts of evil, right? To hurt people, to be sinful, right? It is an ethical critique. Okay, so let's keep going. So we've got this sinner. He even introduces himself as the sinner from the West. Maybe I actually cut that slide out. I realized I had too many slides, but he talks about his evil karma. There's another movie that we don't have time to watch. It's not nearly as well produced, but it tells the rest of the life story where Milarepa, I'll give you a little taste of it, but I'll just talk over it. Where Milarepa has to build up all of these towers over and over again. And so here's Milarepa. Again, it's not nearly as well produced as the one that we watched. He's talking to his teacher, Marpa. Let's see, is Marpa in the scene? Yeah, here's Marpa. Marpa's telling him to build these towers. Here you can see kind of the Tibetan landscape. Let's see, there's a wide angle. I think there is at the beginning. So anyways, what is it like to build a tower? Well, it's a lot of hard work. So Milarepa has to carry all of these rocks on his back, carry these stones across these big valleys. I don't know, I can't find it. Yeah, here's the wide angle I was looking for, right? So here's what Tibet looks like. Here's Marpa telling Milarepa to build all these towers. And again, it might look like an abusive relationship, and it actually kind of is, right? Marpa's like, no, I was drunk. I actually wanted you to build the tower over there. I didn't want a square tower. I wanted a circle tower. So that whole episode is just Milarepa building up these towers and taking them down, building them up and taking them down. But, and here's the sort of key piece here. With this knowledge of Milarepa's sins in the background, it kind of transforms this part of the story. If we had more time, I'd form this into a question. But why is he building up these towers and taking them down? What is the whole point of this exercise? He's expunging his negative karma. He's purifying his negative karma, right? His teacher is putting him through hardship, and he will experience this hardship now instead of in the next life. He's doing this instead of having to go to hell one day. And so it requires faith, it requires belief in karma, it requires belief in multiple lives. But there is a logic here that I encourage you to see. This sort of tough love, this tough teaching, none of us are perfect, right? None of us are coming into this without any sort of sin or any sort of problem or any sort of mental habit that we want to, or that is causing problems for us. And the point of this kind of odd teaching, like building towers up, here's a picture of a very famous tower in Tibet, building towers up and tearing them down, is designed specifically for Milarepa, right? If any of us went and met Marpa, he would probably not make us do this, right? Because as far as I know, none of you are murderous magicians. So maybe we can leave it there. There's one last piece. This is actually the reading for today. It was about Guru Yoga. We didn't quite get there. We can go through it very quickly on Monday. It's actually pretty straightforward. So everything we did today is narrative, right? These are stories about how to follow a teacher. What we can cover on Monday is more like ritual, right? So you don't just sort of magically wake up one day and have this pure perception. You must cultivate it, right? There are practices that you can perform to turn your teacher into a Buddha, right? You know, once you have found this teacher and you want them to be a Buddha, there are things you can do to transform your perception through meditative practice and through ritual in order to achieve that. So we'll cover that next time. Any last thoughts or questions on any of this stuff? How are we all doing? Doing good? All right, well, let's shut it down. I'll stop.